There is a trick to manipulating every human being. Those are the words stated to Gorm by Askeladd as he prepares to engage Thorfinn in one of their many warrior duels throughout the story of Vinland Saga. This quote, although short, expresses great detail about Askeladd as an individual. He is cunning, treacherous, deceptive, and manipulative, all of which are important aspects of what make him the brilliant character that he is. One can see the influence that Yukimura drew from Machiavelli's book The Prince, and how this was instrumental in creating the masterful character that is Askeladd. In this video, we will assess Askeladd's origin story and how it created the conniving war mercenary that he became in the future by applying the Machiavellian principles that the story is filled with. Askeladd's upbringing was traumatic to say the least, but his experiences as a young boy are directly linked to his personality and mentality as a grown man up until his death. Askeladd was born to a Welsh noblewoman who goes by the name of Lydia, who became a slave after she was captured by the Viking Olaf. As he was not a legitimate child, meaning he was a child born out of wedlock, he was not given a proper name by his father. However, his mother gave him the name Lucius Arthurius Castus, a name once held by one of their ancestors. Nonetheless, he remained nameless but began going by the name of Askeladd, which means covered in ashes, as he was forced to work to support his mother, whose health had deteriorated and was forced to live in the stables. Seemingly to provide hope for both Askeladd and herself, Lydia told him the story of Arthurius and made him believe that Arthurius would come to free them from their turmoil. However, time went on and Lydia completely lost her mind. She wandered off into the streets where she came across Askeladd's father. Olaf was about to kill her, but due to Askeladd's childlike bravery, he saved his mother's life and was taken out of slavery by Olaf as he realized that Askeladd was his son. It was here that Askeladd's Machiavellian nature began to brew. Before going into detail about his backstory, Askeladd tells Thorfinn the following: "Let me give you a story, boy, on how to truly kill a man that you hate," where he then explains to Thorfinn the amount of calculation needed, the level of calmness, even in anger, one must be able to exude in order to complete such a feat. Askeladd's killing of his father was truly an adept plot. After being taken in by his father, Askeladd trained in the ways of a warrior alongside his brothers. He gradually came to be accepted by all of them, despite being illegitimate and a former slave. Askeladd described himself as a loyal son, loyal to his father for removing him from slavery. But under this full loyalty, Askeladd's hatred remained unquelled. Askeladd understood that his greatest weapon was not simply his sword, but rather his brilliant mind, his ability to come up with a treacherous plot to achieve his goals, whether those goals are cruel or wholesome. He pieced together a plot to murder his father where he used the sword of his brother, the brother most at odds with their father. An excellently executed frame job. He stabbed his father in the neck at a time when his guard was down, that being as he slept. It all unraveled as Askeladd had planned. The brother was killed as everyone believed him to be the murderer, and Askeladd left, fulfilled in his premeditated goal. To further expound on Askeladd's characteristics and what makes him someone of Machiavellian principles, let us now examine Machiavellianism as a political concept. Machiavelli was an Italian official in the Republic of Florence who wrote a series of books, with the most prominent being the one entitled The Prince, where Machiavelli espouses that those in power should resort to unscrupulous tactics in order to maintain their power. Machiavellianism is a brand of bold realism, where he explains the realities of politics. It is a harsh world filled with deceit, conspiracy, coups, and more, and if one is not prepared to go to such extremes, then they ought not enter into such a world. However, if one so chooses to enter this world, they must be audacious. They must be ready to leave the people satisfied and stupefied by their actions. They must show great virtue. Machiavelli's kind was different to the norms written during his time. Others believed that leaders ought to behave according to socially acceptable norms, as a way to remain in favor with their supporters. This is something that Machiavelli criticizes at great lengths. In its essence, Machiavelli seeks to show that morality cannot be used to judge the exercise of legitimate and illegitimate use of power, meaning one who is good is not given more authority simply because they are good. To be put simply, one in power must do what needs to be done to maintain their power, and one must not be afraid to act immorally when the need arises. That is amoral realism. To properly illustrate how Machiavelli believes that power should be exercised, I must explain the concepts of virtù and fortuna as used by the man himself. Virtue's normal connotation would be virtue as we know in English. However, to Machiavelli it means that one in power ought to be flexible. That individual must be able to gracefully shift from good to evil and back again, as the circumstances and fortune dictate. Fortuna or fortune is the enemy of political order. By its very nature, fortuna is raging and is described as a destructive river that causes a great deal of damage. However, its effects are not beyond human control. Fortuna ought to be subdued, as a man would subdue a woman, as Machiavelli puts it. And this right here is the role of virtue. Thus, virtue is used as a means of responding to fortuna, with that response being violent, because otherwise, fortuna would consume the individual in power. Carefully looking at Askeladd's actions throughout Vinland Saga, one can see the influence of Machiavelli's principles. By nature, Askeladd fits Machiavelli's description of a prince, that being a prudent man who sets his sights as high as possible and seizes his moment with bravery and a type of guile. In Vinland Saga, Askeladd's first illustration of Machiavellian-like characteristics came when he plotted to murder his father. Here, we could see that his goal would require much effort to be achieved. He had to set his sights as high as possible, even though there was a chance of failure. According to Machiavelli, one must be audacious if they seek such levels of success, and Askeladd was definitely that. To adequately place Askeladd into the Machiavellian mold, it is important to note that despite not being a ruler in power, Askeladd had royal blood, and also led a band of soldiers who respected him greatly. Furthermore, the story takes us through a twisted and thought-provoking plot crafted by Askeladd as he sought to use the power of a king as a means to protecting his native land of Wales. A plot laden with manipulation, conspiracy, murder, and deceit, all of the Machiavellian kind. Askeladd is the epitome of a schemer. He has an adept ability to read people and their intentions, and that is not only limited to combat situations. This is exemplified throughout the story. For example, Askeladd assesses Gorm's character as a man who is a slave to money. Now, this is surface level, but Askeladd goes on to compare Gorm to his own slave that he bought with the gold that he is enslaved to, showing how everyone is simply a slave to something. Another example comes when Askeladd looks deeper into why Floki wanted Thor's killed. Askeladd began to think about various reasons as to why Floki cannot complete the task on his own with his large army. Possibly because he did not want to suffer too many casualties, or was it because that was not a lawful killing? Askeladd always wants to understand the agenda. He is always in deep thought. Not only is he adept at reading people, he is also brilliant at assessing situations, particularly in battle, whether it be 1v1 or army versus army. Having such a mind is important if one seeks to practice Machiavellian traits, because you need to understand people to manipulate and deceive them. You need to be adept at scheming to form a successful conspiracy, and to top it all off, you need to be brave and understand that someone has to do it. Askeladd manipulates people with a purpose. He dangles the reward of a duel in front of Thorfinn, knowing that with this, Thorfinn will do as he is told. This is brilliant because Askeladd knows that Thorfinn will never best him in a duel. So in essence, he will have a loyal mercenary, bound by his pride, doing whatever Askeladd asks him to do. Also, in their duels, Askeladd knows exactly how to defeat Thorfinn by getting under his skin, taking advantage of Thorfinn's pride. Askeladd is always in control, and seemingly always a step ahead of his foes. He gives off a sense of invincibility, and that is something that his men remember when situations get difficult. They know that Askeladd always has something up his sleeve. In fact, Askeladd's face gives us as viewers that impression. He is illustrated multiple times with a sly smirk plastered to his face, as if to connote a man that is playing everyone around him like a puppet master. But in doing so, he has gained the trust of many who follow him, and that is the depth of Askeladd's deception. Askeladd detests those men that trust him, and with this he is able to discard of them as he pleases. He is close with them, but not attached in the slightest. They do not know him at all. They simply know him as their leader, and that is all. He makes it known that he hates them, that he always hated them, and he even hates himself. Such is the level of hatred that he has for Norsemen. He no longer needed those men when he told them that he hated them. He simply needed the prince, his most loyal mercenary in Bjorn, and Thorfinn, his puppet. He would not bat an eye in getting rid of those that he no longer needed, because to achieve his goal, all he needed was the few men that he had selected. He is not afraid to use the tactics that Machiavelli espouses, as he murders the chief retainer of the prince, called Ragnar. Askeladd's goal was to help develop the prince into a man who could handle the tasks that Askeladd had in mind. The prince himself was extremely cowardly and virtuous, as he was a devout Christian. Religion is something that Machiavelli rejects because it makes people soft. Religion causes individuals to reject the evils that Machiavelli preaches. Therefore, he believes that it is not needed in politics. This is something that can be seen in Askeladd. And although he respects religion, he does not follow its tenets. Askeladd understands, as Machiavelli did, that if one wants liberty, they must reject religion. He wanted the prince to become more ruthless, particularly since he was sent to die by his father. Askeladd wanted the prince to resent and develop the right emotions to overthrow his father the king, to ultimately aid Askeladd in achieving his plot in protecting Wales. This portrays Askeladd as a prophetic leader, as Machiavelli describes them to be. He is one who is never afraid to dabble in the evils that Machiavelli teaches, while also giving off the semblance of good. Askeladd practices virtue tremendously. His fortuna came when he arrived to Denmark with Prince Canute, and was greeted bitterly by the king. It seemed like there was a plot to have the prince murdered as he returned. Askeladd, being who he is, found a way to turn the tables on the king, making it impossible for the king to issue any suspicious-looking orders to send Canute away. He utilized a stunt double in place of the prince and had one of his men kill the stunt double. Now it looks like the prince's life is in danger. Therefore, any suspicious actions will fall negatively on the part of the king. Askeladd laid his plot out in front of Gunnar, a man who he suspected to be in leagues with the king, and deliberately had Gunnar alert the king. He did this as a way to avoid conflict, which I will admit is not Machiavellian. However, this changes when the king announces that he plans to conquer Wales. Askeladd is shocked. Never did he expect such a miscalculation, as the chapter is so rightfully titled. He has a brief period of fear, and Floki notices this and quickly alerts the king. The king then puts one and one together Askeladd becomes frantic and tries to think up any plot in which to deal with this threat to his homeland. What he first tries to do is talk to the king and get him to see reason. However, in doing so, the king gives him the ultimatum of Wales or the prince. What went through Askeladd's head was, who should I align with? If I align with the king, will he keep his word? If I choose the prince now, will he still be killed? And the like. Askeladd goes on to set the stage for one of the greatest scenes in anime history, akin to the Red Wedding from Game of Thrones. He slices the king's head off after the king disrespects him and his family, leading to the soldiers attacking Askeladd, but he makes quick work of all of them, creating a bloody scene with Askeladd looking as grimacing as ever. A true mad lad. Closer analysis shows that Askeladd was just as audacious as Machiavelli wanted his leaders to be. Askeladd was ready to commit regicide to protect his goal, his people, and his homeland. He understood that he could entrust King Canute to protect them in his death. Therefore, he sets the stage for Canute to become the king and allowed for Canute to kill him. This led to the men respecting Canute, who himself follows Machiavellian principles. But I believe Canute deserves his own video. Askeladd understood that extreme situations create strong leaders. A prince who receives his power in a difficult manner will hold it with ease. That is what Askeladd set Canute up for, and so it remained. Canute was said to be a great king, all thanks to the teachings of Askeladd, and because of this, Askeladd trusted Canute in a sense to leave Wales alone. Askeladd followed Machiavelli all the way down to his damn smirk. The same smirk that Machiavelli held on the cover of his book itself. The two are always plotting, almost always in control, as cunning and as deceptive as anyone can be. Askeladd is truly one of the best written characters in manga history to me, and makes Vinland Saga what it is in the first half of the story.